The Seattle Times is reporting that ICE accosted a well-known Indigenous actor, and when they demanded she present her tribal ID, they claimed it was a fake. Elaine Miles, who is a member of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, is known for her roles in Northern Exposure, Smoke Signals, and recently The Last of Us. According to this piece, which came out Thanksgiving Day in the Seattle Times by Kai Uyehara, Elaine Miles was walking to a bus stop in Redmond when four men wearing masks and vests that said U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement stepped out of two black SUVs with no front license plates, and they pressed her for her ID. The United States federal government recognizes tribal IDs as a valid form of identification. They can be used to fly on airplanes, to cross the border into Canada and to Mexico. A valid tribal ID is a valid ID in the United States. Yet when Miles presented her ID, one agent called it a fake and said, anyone can make that. This piece in the Times says reported encounters between immigration agents and Indigenous people like Miles remain rare, but as immigration enforcement has gotten more aggressive, including in the Seattle area, incidents like Miles are stoking fears beyond immigrant communities. Miles said her son and uncle were both detained by ICE agents who initially did not accept their tribal IDs before eventually letting them go. What we're talking about here is racial profiling, said Seattle-based Indigenous rights attorney Gabriel Golanda, who does not represent Miles. People are getting pulled over and detained on the street because of the dark color of their skin. ICE did not respond to a request for comment for this story. Miles wrote on her social media about her experience, which came the same day as ICE arrested multiple people at Redmond's Bear Creek Village shopping center. Miles said she worried that the men could have been bounty hunters. They did not identify themselves, and when she asked for their names and badge numbers while they detained her, they refused to give it. When she presented her tribal ID and the agents said that it was fake, she pointed to a phone number for the Umatilla Tribal Enrollment Office on the back of the card, and she said, call it. She claims that the agents not only wouldn't call the number, but when she attempted to take her own phone out and call the office for herself, the agents tried unsuccessfully to take her phone from her. That's when, she says, a fifth agent who was standing over by one of the SUVs that, again, didn't have a front license plate, whistled to the other agents. They all got back in their vehicles and drove off. I want to push back really quickly against this claim that the author made that reported encounters between immigration agents and Indigenous people are rare. Indigenous Americans make up about 3% of our population. But accounts on social media, including video footage of ICE accosting Indigenous Americans, is not uncommon. I mean, we have reporting from Des Moines, Iowa from just a couple of weeks ago, November 12th, that an Arizona tribal member was nearly deported by ICE after they took her by mistake. The 24-year-old woman, Letitia Jacoba, is a Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian. She was arrested in Des Moines, Iowa for driving with a suspended license and then was erroneously detained by ICE. Her family said they had to scramble to prove her indigeneity or ICE was going to deport her out of the country. Let me read here a little bit from a piece in the Arizona Mirror that covered her ordeal. I don't think it's accurate to say that the targeting of Native Americans is rare because we had reports all the way back in January. The Navajo Nation put out a warning after more than a dozen Native people in Arizona and New Mexico had been questioned and or detained by ICE. That was in January of this year, and I tried to do a little digging, I could not find an accurate count of how many Indigenous Americans have been accosted or detained or both by ICE so far in 2025. Going back to this piece in the Seattle Times, the Indigenous rights attorney that they spoke to advised all Indigenous people to be ready with any and all forms of identification in case they are questioned by immigration enforcement. Ms. Golanda went on to say the prospect of the First Peoples being physically or forcibly stopped or detained is harrowing and reminiscent of this country's original treatment of the First Peoples. It's also deeply troubling that in 2025, the First People of this country have to essentially look over their shoulders. I would add here that what Donald Trump, Stephen Miller, Kristi Noem are doing, committing an ethnic cleansing against brown people in the United States, is a logical extension of the ongoing genocide against Indigenous Americans that has been happening since the beginning of our country. The southern border is one that we have artificially drawn. Native people born on this side of the border are just as Native as those born on this side of the border. You can't look at what the Trump regime is doing to immigrants in this country and not see how it is connected to what we have been doing to our own Native people for centuries. What happened to Elaine Miles is not okay. Any Indigenous American who is being targeted by ICE because of the color of their skin, because of the racism of ICE and the people working for ICE, none of that is okay. None of that is acceptable. But it's not just Indigenous Americans born in the States who should be able to live without having to look over their shoulders, without having to live in fear, without having to present papers everywhere they go. Let me conclude here with an interview that CNN conducted with Dene Elder James Jackson back on January 27th of this year. Stephen Miller and Donald Trump didn't waste any time after Trump was inaugurated to begin their ethnic cleansing. Now, don't forget, in those early raids in January, more than a dozen Navajo were mistakenly targeted by ICE in Arizona and New Mexico. Jackson called those raids shameful. It's making people hyper aware of their surroundings, he said, limiting their travel in their daily lives because they worry that they will get stopped. Jackson lives in Tuba City between the four sacred mountains of Navajo, 90 miles north of Flagstaff, Arizona. Although he worries for his community, Jackson said he also feels anger on behalf of the immigrants from other countries who come to the U.S. to escape violence and economic hardship for the sole sake of their family's survival. No one's illegal on stolen land, Jackson said. It really goes back to the Indigenous way of life that everything is made for the people. People have to understand that this is not the way to live or to be honorable or neighborly with each other. Anti-immigration tactics go against Indigenous values and their ways of life, which allowed Native people to prosper and live in harmony with the land for thousands of years before American colonization.